So our next video, the one after this one, will be about revolving curves in order to get, revolved shapes. Before I go over that though, I want to briefly, very briefly talk about curves. So curves are part of a system of modeling called NURBS. And if you go to create, you'd see NURBS primitives, and you got a lot of the same primitives that we're used to. They do look very different. For one thing, this actually looks like a curve, unlike the poly sphere, which see how much more geometry that requires, because technically this is all, squares. This is actually a curve, right? And so it seems like it would be a good idea for round objects. But there's modeling with NURBS is very, 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 very difficult. Also, this isn't nearly so perfect a curve as you think, because there we go. The biggest problem with NURBS is that they must be squares. It's called patch modeling also. And so even this primitive, you can see here, there we go, is squares. They're just squares that are squished together. So you can imagine how difficult that makes texturing. Also, you can see how the CV points are floating off the curve because they're influence objects. They're not, in terms of being components of this, they influence the thing. They're not on the thing. And that is very different from polygons, which if we go to polygons, the components are on the mesh. Where'd it go? So this is smooth, so it won't change much. But these vertexes are on the mesh, and it changes with the mesh right there, right? The other thing you will probably notice is that as I'm changing these CV points, which yes, this is a lovely curved object, it's nice and smooth, but what if you want to put an edge on it? Good luck. Any sharp edge like this, everything we've been doing with the hammer, a flat bottom on something, that is so much work. So I mean, if you're really into 3D, if this is what you really want to do, you can look into NURBS. They're like an important thing. They're very important to 3D history. They're not something we're really going to be learning in this class though, because it's too much time for something you're not going to use as often. We can take advantage of the curves though. So the curves, which should always be drawn in an orthographic view, right? Side view, front view, top view. Never draw them just in perspective. But the curves are basically a NURBS span, I guess. If I go to edit point here, this works a little bit better than those CV points. You can get to CV points though, and you can edit the curve, right? It's basically a cross section of a NURB. And so you can very quickly get a cross section of an object and then revolve it around. The components that you get here, you right click, again, control vertexes are the main way to control these, but they are floating off the curve, which is a little weird. And you can see, like it does in Illustrator, it tells you which parts of the curve are influenced by this. It highlights white, so you can tell what you're influencing. If you go to edit point, the edit points are on the curve, but they are still editing other parts of the curve. So it's a little bit more intuitive, but it also, if you forget you're working on a curve, see how this is changing and that's changing. It can be easy to forget you're working with a curve. And there's no good way to like make a sharp edge or anything like that. So you're just getting a general idea. Now, the way this starts, we're gonna put this into object mode and we're gonna move it on out of here. Oh, whoops. What was that? There, I think I had a control point still selected. I'm going to show you what happens when you draw a curve in space. So let's see. Got this, and I can go to create, and I can go to, instead of NURBS primitives, you can actually go to curve tools. And I'm going to say EP curve tool. And I'm going to, make this S-like thing here. So I'm going to go over, hello. There we go. I need to be able to see the grid. Alright, I know it's not the same S shape. I get out of that tool and I go to this tool and I'm like, alright, cool, it's like an S shape, and then I do this. It draws it flat. You can only draw a curve in 2 dimensions, and it's, at least initially, and so it draws it flat on the surface. But you think you're looking at one that's vertical. So, always draw in an orthographic view. Which it was practically begging me to do anyways when you saw it get all weird and screwy. So I can go into this view, and it gets curvy as soon as I let go of the second one. Alright, now if you're drawing this from scratch and you want to revolve it, make sure it starts and stops on this y-axis, because that's what it's going to revolve around. And again, you can right click and you go into edit point mode and you can kind of fix it up and make it look a little bit better. I probably clicked too many times. This is a lot to have to edit. A little bit too much. But you don't have to edit it too much, because it is going to, once you turn it into a polygon later when you revolve it, it's going to get a lot easier.